This racist group brought hate to Chicago and paid the price. Imagine an armed extremist group marching into your neighborhood, declaring they're going to take back control, backed by the police and ignored by the media. But they don't know. Someone is silently sitting in the shadows, waiting. And when he rises, an entire city rises with him. This is the story of Hubert Shost Freeman, the silent warrior who dismantled an army of hatred from the heart of Chicago. Inside an old barbershop on 63rd Southside Chicago, the buzzing of the clippers suddenly stopped. Every man in the shop, from young men to old veterans, went quiet, eyes fixed on a phone screen streaming live from Missouri. Gregory Patriot Hale, leader of the extremist group Patriot Front Revival, was shouting about restoring America to white hands, with their next stop being right there. Southside. They think this is rural Mississippi? Marcus, a former soldier from Afghanistan, growled as he slammed his fist into the wooden armrest. No one responded, but in the dim corner, a man quietly sipped his cold coffee. Bald head, eyes sharp as a blade, stone still. That was Hubert Shost Freeman. Shost had once been a U.S. Marine, deployed 3 times to Ramadi and Fallujah, Iraq. But the greatest battle of his life was now unfolding at home. He didn't raise his voice or act impulsively, but one look into his eyes told you that when Shost goes quiet, the operation has already begun. After his discharge, he returned to Southside and quietly built a network no one could have imagined. Lloyd, a covert resistance group made up of veterans, engineers, teachers, delivery drivers, and even healthcare workers from the neighborhood. People who didn't carry guns, but carried knowledge and loyalty to their community. From his coat pocket, Shost pulled out a map that looked exactly like Gregory's rally plan. But this one had red marks not for celebration, but for countermeasures, signal jamming points, camera blind spots, escape routes, and soft traps, mapped out along every direction the march might take. He looked around the shop, at Marcus, Jamal, Rashid, and even the high schooler Leon getting a twist up. "They want to march into our home?" he said slowly, his voice gravelly. "Fine. We'll give them a proper Chicago welcome." Jamal, a 43-year-old electrician who had lost his younger brother to gun violence in 2016, bowed his head. "We're not letting our kids grow up in fear. Not another time." As night fell, Lloyd moved into action, not with weapons, but with tech, tactics, and silent coordination. A street camera technician discreetly rerouted control of surveillance systems to the group. An Uber Eats driver planted a recording device near the extremist group's hotel. A former military medic stocked up painkillers and gauze in the basement of an old church, just in case. All communications were encrypted through Signal, Telegram, and even Discord, disguised under the name Southside Runner. The codes were hidden in music snippets, animated GIFs, and gaming invites. No one from the outside could trace them. On the night of July 2nd, inside the abandoned Grace Church, dimly lit by candles, more than 20 men and women sat in a circle. On the table lay maps, devices, and Lloyd's black flag. Shost stood up, eyes unblinking. "This is our home. If anyone wants to violate it, they will pay." No one clapped. No one spoke. But every head bowed, as if taking an oath, with one singular conviction: defend at all costs. The electric razor came to a halt. All the men gathered there, elders and young night shift workers alike, stared at their phones. Gregory Patriot Hale, leader of the extremist Patriot Front Revival, was live streaming from Missouri, announcing he would launch a white unity march right through their neighborhood on July 3rd. Alongside him, a map of Southside circled in red, as if their entire community was nothing but a trophy. The air thickened. Marcus, a veteran who had served in Kandahar, gritted his teeth and slammed his hand into the wooden bench hard enough to bleed. They think this is some backwoods town in Mississippi? Blood has been spilled to hold every corner of this block. In the shadowed corner of the barber shop, beneath the yellow light spilling over worn-out tiles, a man sat in silence, sipping a cup of pitch-black coffee, his bald head gleaming, eyes cold and sharp as steel. That was Hubert Shost Freeman, former U.S. Marine, who had survived 3 tours in Fallujah, Iraq's deadliest zone. He didn't say much, but when he lifted his head, the entire room fell silent. Shost understood better than anyone. The law wasn't going to step in, because the law, right now, was protecting the very ones needing to be stopped. After the military, he had come home, to a cracked, gray, but unbroken South Side. He didn't open a gym or coach sports. Instead, he built a network no one saw coming. Lloyd, made of veterans, camera techs, firefighters, nurses, IT students, delivery drivers, and even apartment security guards. Each member knew only their role, but all were connected by Shost. He didn't promise retaliation with guns, but with intellect, with strategy, and a chilling clarity of purpose. In his coat pocket that night was a foil-printed map, identical to the one Gregory held in his live stream, but marked with red ink. 6 trap zones, 4 drone signal jammers, 3 underground resupply points, and 1 area marked with a massive X, the place where the march would be broken. "They want to march into our home?" Shost whispered, eyes like daggers. "Good. We'll welcome them the Chicago way." Jamal, the electrician just back from a night shift, shook his head lightly. "I've got 3 kids. We're not raising another generation in fear. Not for one more night. No slogans, no megaphones." In just 12 hours, Lloyd quietly spread through the alleys of Southside like veins beneath the pavement. A city surveillance tech sent an encrypted message via telegram. "Switch cameras on 55th to private mode." An Uber Eats driver snapped a photo of the extremist group's van plates at the Bronzeville Hotel, captioned, "Van 3 is carrying loudspeakers and banners." A cybersecurity college student, disguised as an Amazon courier, planted a bug at the hotel gate. All communications were coded via Signal under the false group name Urban Chess League. The phrase "pawn moved" meant a scout was on the move. "Knight sacrificed" meant someone had been detected. Each message came masked as a cat meme or an old jazz lyric. That afternoon, at Grace Church, abandoned for nearly 14 years, the sunset cast fractured light through stained glass windows. Shost stood in the dusty nave, unfolding the map over a wooden table. Around him were nearly 20 people, some old, some young, each with a role, a fire inside, and one shared belief. "This isn't a protest," Shost said. "This is a hate march, with protection, with a plan, and with a target. And we're not letting them win." A young man asked softly, "What if they come with guns?" Shost replied simply, "Then they'll relearn the lesson taught in blood by those who came before them in Chicago." A gentle breeze passed through the cracked stone hallway. The small black flag with the white skull fluttered once in the wind, then fell still on the table, as if to seal a silent oath. Southside wasn't alone. They had Lloyd, and the war began right then. On the sweltering morning of July 2nd, in the 3rd-floor meeting room of the 7th District Police Station, responsible for overseeing Southside Chicago, the air felt thick, as if something was being buried. More than 24 officers sat in rows, bulletproof vests hanging behind their chairs, beads of sweat forming at their temples, not just because of the heat. Captain Mark Reynolds, CPD's field commander, stood before a projection screen, pointing at a digital map showing the route of the Patriot Front Revival's march. "The order from above is clear," his voice rang out. "We will escort the march, protect the right to express speech as guaranteed by the Constitution." A pen clicked loudly in the room. Lieutenant James Harris, a black officer with 15 years of frontline experience, growled. "What Constitution permits us to protect an armed extremist parade, waving banners calling for racial cleansing? They're not protesting. They're provoking." Reynolds paused for a few seconds. He knew Harris wasn't wrong, but he also knew who was watching. The names not present in the room, but embedded in every email from City Hall and upper command. "We don't choose the message," Reynolds said. "We just protect the right to say it." Murmurs rippled through the room. Officer Wynn, a young cop just 6 months out of the academy, leaned toward his partner and whispered, "Feels like we're guarding hate on parade." A veteran officer let out a dry laugh and replied, "And maybe guarding a bomb too, if it comes to that." On the whiteboard, the deployment diagram was drawn in detail. A crowd control unit at the 53rd and King Drive intersection. 3 riot vans dispersed along the 55th route, and 2 tear gas teams positioned within a 400-meter radius around Washington Park, slated to host the largest gathering. But the real threat wasn't the map. It lay in the small red footnotes beneath. Potential presence of fake explosives. High risk of media trap. Local self-organized force, Lloyd, operating covertly. "Where did this intel come from?" Lieutenant Harris asked, pointing at the scribbled name Lloyd in parentheses. Reynolds looked at him, then quietly replied, "A note from a classified FBI report sent in last night. Not for public disclosure." A long silence followed. Everyone in the room understood. If a force like Lloyd truly existed and was willing to resist, then the police were no longer neutral. They stood between 2 crossfires. A string of internal messages began to spread through the radio system. Several officers shared concerns upon learning that Southside residents had quietly mobilized. One whispered, "Sir, folks in this neighborhood aren't going to sit this out. If they respond, we can't contain it." As a precaution, 3 ambulance teams from Trinity Hospital were quietly stationed near Washington Park. Nurses wore civilian clothes. Ambulances had no sirens, no lights. They waited, silent. And just as Reynolds read a memo from City Hall aloud, "Maintain peace. Avoid confrontation. Do not embarrass the city in the eyes of national media." A Latino officer sighed, removed his badge from his chest and whispered, "We're playing a public relations game. No one believes in this so-called neutrality anymore." On a handwritten note left at the back of the room, seemingly forgotten, someone had scrawled, "Justice doesn't always come from the arm that wears a badge." Outside, the wail of an ambulance siren pierced through the oppressive midday heat. Not because someone was injured, but because those in uniform knew they were standing on a battlefield with no clear enemy. Only the truth was twisted, and people were forced to choose sides. A young officer stood up and quietly said to his colleague, "If blood spills tomorrow, I just hope I'm not the one pulling the trigger." Night of July 2nd. The clock had just struck 11:03 p.m. Bronzeville Inn, a once bustling 8-story hotel from the 1980s, now faded with peeling paint and fogged windows, had become the temporary headquarters of the Patriot Front Revival, the extremist group that had arrived in Chicago with vows to reclaim the South Side. Vanessa, 27 years old, the only woman in the group's leadership circle, stepped out the back of the hotel with a Marlboro Gold in hand and an oversized camo jacket draped over her shoulders. She had been celebrated in live streams as the brave symbol of a new generation, having led rallies in Georgia and Idaho, But tonight, as she descended the stone steps, something was different. A dark figure flickered past a street corner camera, then vanished into the quiet night. No one noticed, and no one ever saw her return. 3 hours later, at 2:14 a.m., the hotel's security team realized Vanessa was missing from the final prep meeting. An internal search began. They sprinted down hallways, opened every public restroom, and made repeated calls. But the only result was a single black glove. The glove had been stuffed into the neck of a broken glass bottle, still stained with blood. Inside the bottle, a piece of fabric bore a handwritten message in red ink. "She's not gone. She's just been shown the truth." Immediately, Gregory Hale summoned the entire leadership team to the 6th floor for an emergency meeting. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly, his eyes darting toward the rear parking lot through the window. "Someone dared to take one of ours, in a guarded hotel, in a city with police," he shouted, voice cracking with emotion. "They think we'll be afraid?" But clearly, he was the one who was afraid. When the hotel's security team reviewed the footage, they found the entire window from 10:58 to 11:21 had been wiped clean, not due to system error or signal loss, but direct interference. The footage before and after played perfectly. But the moment Vanessa stepped outside was gone, as if it never existed. On the back wall of the hotel, a blood-red message had been stenciled with precision. "Turn back. Wrong city." The letters were applied with a stencil technique, precise, clean, deliberate. No rush, no rage, just the calculated chill of someone who had planned it all. Inside the meeting room, tension cracked the air. Some clutched their gun straps tighter. Others stepped back, whispering doubtfully to one another. A young member, barely 20, murmured, "We don't know who we're up against, do we?" Gregory slammed the table. "No one backs out. To quit is treason. It's betrayal." But in their eyes, faith had already begun to fracture. They were no longer afraid of outsiders. They feared each other. Meanwhile, in a room just over 300 meters from the hotel, behind a thin curtain, Viper, Lloyd's veteran recon operative, was listening in through a planted device on the 6th floor conference room door. "They're starting to panic," she spoke into her earpiece. "They're cracking. One more push." Hubert Shost Freeman, seated in the basement of Grace Church, listened silently to every word through an encrypted channel. He didn't speak. He just gave a small nod and pressed the signal button. MM3- Phase 2 initiated. At that moment, on the phone of one of the extremist members, an anonymous message popped up. "She's not missing. She was spared. This time." The entire hotel fell into chaos. No one had been attacked. No gunshots fired. No pools of blood. But the silence alone was enough to suffocate the heartbeat of an entire extremist group. And just like that, Lloyd's counteroffensive officially began. Not on a battlefield, just with the shadows. And one message: wrong city. The night of July 3rd, wind swept through the alleys of Southside carrying the scent of damp concrete and rust. But deep underground, in the basement of the abandoned Grace Church, a different kind of symphony was being written, composed of strategy, silence, and the cold hatred of those who had endured too much for too long. Hubert Shost Freeman stood at the head of a large wooden table strewn with maps, notes, tablets, and 3 burner phones. Beneath the dim glow of a light bulb strung from a copper wire, the entire Lloyd team, 11 people, stood in a circle. No uniforms, no slogans, only a quiet, deep-rooted resolve: protect the community at all costs. On the map was the main march route led by Gregory Hale, starting at Washington Park, moving down Cottage Grove Avenue, ending with a speech at the old plaza near the Jefferson Building. But Lloyd didn't see maps the way ordinary people did. They saw choke points, blind camera angles, ambulance-inaccessible roads, and they planned as if they were preparing for a military operation in Fallujah. Razor, a powerfully built black man in his 40s, and a former Chicago cop fired in 2018 for speaking out against racial brutality within the department, pointed at 4 red dots. The high-speed intervention unit will be posted here. Maximum response time, 15 seconds. We're not carrying lethal weapons. But if they lay hands on anyone, we'll extract them from the crowd in under 30 seconds. Viper, a former Pentagon cyber analyst turned field operative, pulled up a list of more than 36 social media accounts on a small monitor, all confirmed members of the extremist group. We've identified their residences, workplaces, and all hate-based posts from the past 6 months. Our facial recognition system will alert us the moment any of them enters a monitored zone. Shost didn't interrupt. He just nodded. He held up a homemade drone equipped with infrared cameras and a mini Bluetooth speaker. Operation Mirror begins at 10 a.m. sharp. The drones will fly over the crowd, broadcasting audio clips, their own words, the same ones they live-streamed while spewing hate at others. In one corner, over 500 pre-printed flyers sat, stacked, bold red italic text reading, "We know you, we see you." Each is accompanied by a portrait, home address, workplace, and license plate. Some included the chilling line, "Would you want your neighbors to know this?" Shost ran his fingers across the map, tracing 3 coded escape routes by color. Green, for civilians accidentally caught in the area. Yellow, for Lloyd operatives if exposed. Red, the lure route, designed to draw the rally into a signal-dead zone, where all communications would be cut. Each team member was issued a kit including a burner phone for 24-hour use only, a bicycle light capable of blinking Morse code in emergencies, a digital map with checkpoints, supply stations, and QR codes to guide civilians to safety. A small card bearing Lloyd's emblem, a white skull between 2 black wings, not meant to intimidate, but to remind. A young recon scout named Malik reported, "We've planted a mic beneath the rally's main sound van. All internal communications will stream directly back here." Shost didn't speak much. He pulled from his pocket a small flag, black cloth, a hand-stitched white skull, and planted it firmly at the intersection of 55th and Cottage Grove, the scheduled location of Gregory Hale's speech. "They start here," he said softly, eyes locked, unblinking. "Then they end here." No one asked, "What if the plan fails?" Because in that room, no one believed in failure. There was only discipline, silence, and a fury that had been compressed too long, enough to burn an entire march to ash. Morning of July 3rd, 8:11 a.m. The sky over Chicago was cloudless. Sunlight streamed down Cottage Grove Avenue, casting long, distorted shadows of old buildings as if they were watching. At Washington Park, once the site of civil rights marches, a new crowd had taken over. The Patriot Front revival. 7 16-seat vans stood in perfect formation. 120 people dressed in black and white, Gothic-lettered uniforms, skull masks covering most of their faces. Their drones lifted into the sky, recording from above like a declaration of digital warfare. They didn't know. Everything was also being recorded, from the opposite side. As the group passed the second intersection on their route, a sharp whoosh echoed from the sky. A Lloyd drone dove down, not with weapons, but hundreds of tightly folded flyers, released from a height of 50 meters. The wind caught them. Flyers were scattered everywhere. And then, the ground was blanketed in white, with personal photos, home addresses, social media accounts, images of children, workplaces, of every individual in the march. In the center of each flyer, bold red capital letters read, "We know who you are." There is no anonymity in this city. Chaos broke out instantly. One man screamed, "My face! That's my daughter's photo. Are they tracking me?" A cluster of people rushed to cover their faces, yanking masks off one another. Some tore flags from their hands, trying to exit the crowd. Police, positioned exactly as per constitutional order, stood confused, unable to make sense of what was happening. Civilians from a distance began approaching, phones raised, live streaming. Media swarmed in like a hive in collapse. Hashtags, Know Your Neighbor and Doc Exposed, reached Twitter's trending list within 14 minutes. Within 30 minutes, over 8,200 tweets shared the identities of extremist participants at the rally. NGOs and even some tech companies released statements initiating reviews into partners who may have hired individuals promoting hate-based ideologies. Then, at exactly 8:47, boom! A deafening explosion ripped through the air. A white van parked near a shoe repair shop along the avenue burst into flames. The fire shot over 4 meters high, shattering shop windows. Police had to scatter to extinguish the fire. People screamed, but strangely, no one was hurt. The van was confirmed to be empty. The blaze created a temporary blind zone more than 20 meters wide, where all city surveillance was disabled. Lloyd had timed it precisely. At that moment, 2 extremist members were pulled into a nearby alley. No gunshots, no screams. When a few people noticed, all that remained was a dropped radio on the cement, playing an old jazz tune, a trembling black voice from the 1960s, echoing like a ghost from an erased past. Meanwhile, Gregory Hale shouted into his radio, "Who did this? Report the situation! Where is everyone?" But instead of a response, the radio suddenly played back. His voice, repeating the very phrase he had screamed, "Southside belongs to us!" Then came a distorted, icy, mechanical laugh, broken, cold, echoing like it had risen from underground. At that moment, from the rooftop of an abandoned building to the north, Hubert Shost Freeman stood motionless. The wind roared, the Lloyd flag fluttering lightly in his hand. No applause, no cheers, but he nodded slightly. It's begun. They'll understand. This isn't a protest. This is an invasion. And with every step they take, they will pay in their deepest fear. At the operations hub in the basement of Grace Church, one message lit up on the screen. M6, complete. Transitioning to M7. Lloyd never sleeps. Eric Turner. His name was chanted during Patriot Front drills as a symbol of dominance. The blood of the unyielding South, as they proudly called him. Turner was once a military officer, discharged after a scandal involving the assault of a black detainee in Fallujah in 2006. Since then, he had risen as one of the most dangerous extremist leaders in the Midwest, boasting over 6,000 followers across encrypted platforms like Gab, Rumble, and Parler. That morning, Turner appeared at the head of the march like a wartime general. Tactical body armor clung tight to his frame, and in his hand, he held a custom-made Confederate flag, over 2 meters long, edged with silver thread, handcrafted in a small Alabama workshop. He shouted, "This is our land! Take it back!" The crowd behind him erupted in fevered cheers. But in Chicago, the chill in the air didn't come from the weather. It came from something unspoken, a creeping feeling of being watched by something nameless. As the group approached the 5th intersection, 57th Street and Drexel Avenue, Turner suddenly vanished from formation. No sound. No struggle. No one saw anyone touch him. Just a shadow darting past the alley on the left. A person live streaming on a Samsung Galaxy happened to pan their camera at the exact moment. Turner was yanked backward into the alley, as if by an invisible force. He thrashed, screamed, pure panic in his voice. The video cut out. Signal gone. Just 14 minutes later, the video surfaced on TikTok, X, Twitter, and Reddit. Within 45 minutes, it had 1.2 million views. The internet exploded. Reporters rushed in. The whispers began. This isn't a protest anymore. This is punishment. 3 hours later, a local reporter named Sandra Flores discovered Turner's body hanging from a street lamp at the 57th intersection. His limbs were tightly bound, his mouth stuffed with cloth, his eyes frozen wide open. Carved into his chest with a blade were the words, "Wrong City." The crime scene photo leaked, spreading like wildfire through dry grass. Headlines ran across every network. Extremist icon assassinated in broad daylight. Lloyd, a gang, or the ghosts of history. Police locked down the entire area. FBI and ATF agents were quietly dispatched, but in the communities of South Chicago, murmurs echoed. They warned them. They just didn't listen. At the Bronzeville Inn, where the marchers were staying, what had been a boiling rage now fell into eerie silence. Some of the younger members began to cry. Others packed their bags. A few trembled as they frantically tried to delete their social media accounts. A man around 50 shouted, "Retreat! Retreat is cowardice." But no one responded. They just looked at each other, then at the space Turner had left behind, as if staying meant becoming the next target. In the hotel's security meeting room, the Chicago police chief tried to speak calmly. "We won't let this spiral out of control." But in his mind raced a reel of unanswerable questions. No cameras, no traces, no witnesses. Only darkness. Online, a new hashtag took over, #TurnerFalls. But Chicago residents used another, #LloydLives. Major donors withdrew their funding from Patriot Front. A logistics company in Tennessee announced it had been misled. A weapons retailer in Indiana terminated its contract, citing reputation concerns. A young woman in the extremist group, around 19, looked at the TV, watching the image of Turner's body slowly spin on the newsfeed, and whispered, "We don't know who we're up against, do we?" No one answered. But in the basement of Grace Church, Razor, the black former cop fired for whistleblowing, smirked slightly. It's not that they don't know. They just never believed anyone would dare stand against them. Now they believe. 3:26 p.m., July 3rd. At the Bronzeville Inn, 7th floor, a small conference room once used for Patriot Front's internal meetings, now echoed with screams, table slams, and the chilling sound of a gun being unholstered. The air reeked of sweat, gunpowder, and raw despair. Gregory, no longer the proud leader from the live streams, stood in the center of the room, Glock in hand, voice ragged with exhaustion and fury. "Which one of you sold out the plan?" No answer. 1 minute. 2. Then suddenly, a blonde member named Caleb growled, "It was Vanessa." She vanished at the worst time. What if she got caught and spilled everything? Another fired back, "No! You're the one who got hacked. You posted the rally route on Discord." The room descended into chaos. One man punched the table. Another drew a knife. A third swung a metal chair at the window in panic. Voices erupted. "Where the hell are we? How do these people know every step we take before we do?" Tensions exploded as an unidentified member pulled a gun and pointed it straight at Gregory. "You let us into hell. The live stream, the rally. It was all a setup. What now?" Gregory didn't even get to reply. A fist slammed into his jaw, sending him crashing against the table, blood spilling from his mouth. No one helped. No pity in any gaze. The collapse of leadership came like a lightning strike. 4 men dragged him toward the second-floor window, already shattered. Below, a black Cadillac Escalade SUV without plates sat motionless, hazard lights blinking in rhythm. They threw Gregory down like discarded cargo. The SUV rolled away in silence. No gunfire, no shouts, just a vehicle swallowing the darkness whole. Inside the room, deathly silence took hold. Someone gasped for air. A female member broke into sobs. "I don't want to die here." A man, once wrapped in tactical gear and a skull mask, now stripped off everything, trembling as he muttered like a child lost. "Mom, I shouldn't have come here. No leader, no mission, no faith." Those who believed in strength through force now stood like a broken army, unraveling in the maze of fear they built themselves. And then, a scream came from the shared bathroom, where someone found a white skull symbol painted in dried blood on the mirror. No one knew when it appeared. No camera captured it. No sound of a door. Just the familiar emblem, Lloyd's mark. Outside, the media began gathering in front of the hotel. A reporter from the Chicago News Network was pushed away by security. But within 15 minutes, live streams from civilians on the sidewalk showed a small group of extremists fleeing in chaos, leaving behind backpacks, flags, and rubber weapons. On the rooftop of a building 2 blocks away, Hubert Schost Freeman listened to a live report through his headset. "Primary target has withdrawn," a scout said. "The rest are collapsing piece by piece." Schost didn't smile. He simply exhaled and nodded. They didn't need to be defeated. They set themselves on fire. We were just the wind, blowing past. In Southside Chicago, people didn't need tanks to defend the streets. They had memory. They had ancestors. They had a rage carved into the pavement like fossilized flame. On the morning of July 4th, the morning news from Chicago News. 7, WCN, and even the local CNN affiliate all echoed the same vague phrase. The Southside Rally incident. Short, ambiguous, without close-up footage, no mention of the extremist group, no acknowledgement of Eric Turner's death, not a word about Gregory's disappearance, and absolutely nothing about the name Lloyd. At 10:15 a.m., Mayor Davis held a press conference at City Hall. Standing behind him were white officials, and his voice was stiff. "We condemn violence from any side and commit to a thorough investigation. Chicago is a city of unity and respect." When a reporter asked, "How many people from the rally are currently missing?" he simply replied, "Several individuals are out of contact. We are still verifying." A black female journalist from the community network, The Pulse, followed up. Why were the CCTV cameras around Bronzeville Inn down for a continuous 3 hours? The mayor glanced at the police chief, who only smiled faintly, and said, "Technical malfunction. It's under review." Outside, the whole city already knew the answer. In grocery stores, barbershops, and gas stations across the South Side, people whispered "Schost" like a legend. A young man pushing a cart at Walgreens smiled as someone said, "They dropped leaflets from drones, had their home addresses on them. That's justice, 21st century style." At the barbershop on 63rd, Marcus, the veteran once shaken by the livestream, held up his phone, showing everyone the clip of Turner hanging from the street lamp, even though it had been removed from official platforms. Media won't play it, but everyone here saved it on their phones. At Grace Church, a nearly 70-year-old woman named Evelyn quietly placed a bouquet beneath the lamppost where Turner was found. Attached was a piece of cardboard with a handwritten message. "Don't ever come back here." No one filmed it. No interviews. But passersby stopped and nodded. On Twitter, the hashtags number #JusticeByShadow and #WeKnow began to trend, with thousands of shares. One image stood out, a Lloyd drone silhouetted against a dim sky, dropping hundreds of flyers with the caption, "We see you." One tweet, garnered over 240,000 likes in 12 hours. The FBI won't speak, the press won't publish, but we know, and we're grateful. In the basement of Grace Church, a faint yellow light flickered. Shost sat alone, watching the 7 p.m. news report on his laptop. His expression was calm, eyes heavy with thought. He lifted a cup of black tea, inhaled slowly. On screen, once again, the anchor ended with the familiar phrase, "And the July 3rd rally incident remains under investigation. No additional updates from the FBI at this time." Shost closed his eyes, gently set the cup down on the wooden table, and spoke a single sentence. "Silence is also a way to win." He shut off the screen. There was no applause, no gold trophy, only the quiet of a man who knew, deep down, that the community had won without ever needing to shout. In the next room, Viper and Razor were reviewing the digitized map. Each disappearing red dot meant a threat neutralized. "When's the next operation?" "When Chicago needs us, when the darkness stirs again." In the basement of Grace Church, dim light reflected off aged brick walls, where Hubert Shost Freeman stood quietly, rehanging the white skull flag with crimson trim on a rusted iron hook. The corner of the flag was torn, still singed from the Washington Park explosion, but it was those scars that made it a symbol that could not be destroyed. Razor stood behind him, voice hoarse. "Do you think they'll come back?" Shost didn't turn, eyes still fixed on the flag. "Not here. Not ever again." In the corner, a young member, Malik, a former engineering student who had joined Lloyd less than 6 weeks earlier, spoke up hesitantly. "Did we win?" Shost looked at the boy, narrowed his eyes, then replied slowly, "There's no victory in war, only freedom, and it's always temporary." The room fell silent. Everyone bowed their heads. There was no celebration, no music, only clarity, the kind only those who have walked through darkness can truly understand. They began inventory. 17 burner phones were sealed in bags, labeled with QR-coded communication routes. 6 GPS trackers were reprogrammed into ghost node mode. 4 infrared drones, one with a broken wing, still retained memory units with embedded SSD chips. Viper logged all the data onto an external hard drive, then sealed it and labeled it. Phase 2. Do not open unless activated. On the wooden table, a new map was laid out, laminated, thick-coated, with red marks now appearing by timestamp and coordinates. In the bottom right corner was a handwritten note. Boise, Idaho, September. Razor looked over. They thought Chicago was the end. Turns out, it was only the beginning. Shost nodded. Lloyd isn't a group. Lloyd is an antibody. Every time hatred mutates, we become the immune system. In New Orleans, a local radio station received an anonymous copy of the deleted rally video from Chicago. In Albuquerque, a mysterious flyer appeared on a city council desk, reading, "We are watching. Your city might be next." In Boise, a group of black college students, being quietly followed, were warned before they walked into an extremist trap via a text from an unknown number. Don't go. You are marked. Final shot. The camera pans from the ceiling down to the narrow basement window of Grace Church. The golden afternoon light filters through the old glass, shining directly onto the white skull flag. The torn fabric flutters gently in the breeze. The wind isn't strong, but it's enough to bring the flag to life. Outside, a little girl around 8 years old walks by, holding her mother's hand. She looks up at the church and asks, "Mom, why is this place so quiet?" The mother simply replies, eyes lingering on the basement window, "Because someone's already keeping watch, sweetheart." Final voiceover rolls in, slow, certain, unwavering. No one knows their names. No one carves their statues. But whenever darkness rises, they return, like shadows that protect. The screen fades to black. White text appears, one line at a time. They brought hate. They left in silence. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.